So I'm bored, have a few more minutes to my break before I have to get back out in the heat. And so I figured I would talk about a movie I watched last night to nobody. So I watched the movie Apollo 18, and no spoilers in the beginning. I thought it was okay. The premise was really good. The premise had a lot of potential, and I think it was ultimately squandered in the end. I don't know that I would watch it again, and I don't know that I would recommend somebody watch it. I mean, it wasn't like a waste of time, but I think there was a lot more that could have been done with it. The premise in the beginning sets up, this is not really any spoilers, it's talked about in the first 5 minutes of the movie. The premise is this secret mission, Apollo 18. Basically, officially, the Apollo program was canceled. I think the last mission was in 72. And basically, there had been planned, Apollo 18, 19, and 20 had been planned. They were canceled, and so there was hardware left over. This is true in the real world because there was hardware left over, but it was used differently than what it's portrayed in the movie. And I think it would have done better to try to tie into how we know it was used in the real world. In the movie, the Department of Defense, the U.S. Department of Defense seizes or takes control of the mission, uses the Apollo hardware to launch a classified mission to the moon. In real life, NASA used the one complete that I recall. There was one more booster Saturn V rocket that was completed when the program was canceled. And instead of wasting it, they used it, and they used the remaining fuel tank of one of the Saturn rockets, and in the cargo space of where the lunar lander would have been, and they put a fuel tank in, and that's what becomes Skylab in the mid 70s. So that's a real mission that happened. It was the first U.S. space station. In the movie, they don't talk about that. They just make it seem like there was this Apollo mission that happened secretly, somehow being launched, and we find footage of it 40 years later in 2011 in a site that doesn't work anymore, is where supposedly all this stuff was uploaded to. Anyway, I think the movie would have done better to try to tie it into real events, like try to say that Skylab was actually launched from another place, and they said that Skylab was launched from Cape Canaveral, and what it really was Apollo 18, but really Skylab was launched from somewhere else, or that it both were on the same mission and it was just hidden, something. To try to more neatly tie it into the real world, but they didn't do that. But anyway, it is a secret mission, and they go on a secret mission and things happen. So the payoff is not that great. The big bads, the evil, or the antagonist of the story, it's not that creative. I don't know. I mean, the potential was there. There was a story to be told that could have been weaved or woven into real life events that in the end could have made for an interesting story to tell, especially when you find out things later on in the story that I can't talk about because it might be a spoiler. So now I'm going to jump into spoilers. So I think it would have been better had the Russians played a bigger part in the story, and even have been the big bad, or maybe basically, if you watch the movie, there's these rock spiders that somehow get into their suits without puncturing them, and I think it's it could have been they already had the rocks and it was hidden inside the suit. They had gotten the rocks on the previous mission. That's probably what they were trying to go for, but it wasn't clear enough. And so I was sitting there wondering, watching the movie, like, when did this happen? How did this happen? Why are they not bleeding air out in space? But also, the Russians are there, and then, the commander gets bit by the spider, gets invaded by the spider, or whatever happened there, and then he has this virus. So there's rock spiders that are the bad, but also there's this virus that enters the picture that doesn't really have any kind of explanation done to it, except for the commander mentions that it's taking him over and he can hear them, and it draws him to this crater, and he comes back at the end trying to break in whenever he's finally taken over, and before he finally blows up and dies. There's so much potential there. There's so much that could have been done that it's disappointing. I can't enjoy the story for the story because there's so many things that could have been done better and could have been done in a way to where it fixed into real life. Because you can absolutely see the DoD having a mission, taking over an Apollo mission, sending secret astronauts to the moon, claiming they were killed in training exercises, leaving them on the moon. That all makes perfect sense. That's stuff that happens in real life with covert ops right now, where it's plausible deniability. All that stuff makes sense. But taking more care with the rock spiders, or replacing the rock spiders with this virus, or even if it's just that the rocks themselves contain a virus, because it's never explained why don't the rocks that were brought back from the earlier Apollo missions, what's happened with them? It says so many of them were given as gifts and have gone missing. I'm not even sure how true that is. I'm sure there were some that were given out, but a lot of that stuff was saved for study. There's stuff saved right now in clean rooms in with NASA that you can still go study if you got access to it. Clean samples from the moon missions from the 70s. So I'm not sure how much of that they gave out, but maybe they did. Maybe it was. But either way, it's not explained why those rocks didn't attack the earlier Apollo astronauts, why the rocks that were given out didn't cause more drama here on Earth. I mean, it's too vague, and vagueness is good in a lot of stories, but this is too vague, and it's too much going on. Not enough going on in the story, too much going on. This doesn't explain things, and it's just, anyway. So I figured I'd ramble about it because I'm on my break and I have nothing to do right now, at least for a few more minutes. So I wouldn't recommend Apollo 18 as a watch. It's interesting, but honestly, ultimately, it irritated me as much as anything. I'm a fan of space. I love space, but it irritated me as much because there were so much more possibilities that could have been done with the story to make it better and make it weave into real life, to turn it into like a Blair Witch type thing, where it's close enough to what's going on in the real world, or it sounds close enough to what's like, to where you're like, wow, even if it come to explaining something later of stuff that's happened on Earth, maybe that could be related to the rock monsters or a virus outbreak, not COVID, that could have been, of course, this was before COVID, that could have been explained, something to flesh out that story more, because there's a lot of bones there. Most of them are good. Some of them could be done better, but none of it's fleshed out enough to make sense. So if you're a big fan of space, I don't know that I would recommend you watch it, because it might irritate you like it did me. I don't know, maybe not. And either way, I would say I don't recommend. I would say it's a solid meh. So there we go. Maybe I'll do this again. Either way, until next time.